He took poisoned arrows, saving the alien queen and her children. 50 years later, she returned with an army. The storm arrived before midnight. Not the soft kind that rolled across prairie lands with distant thunder and cooling rain. This storm came like the end of the world itself, violent winds tearing through the dead grasslands, black clouds twisting across the heavens, lightning ripping open the sky so fiercely that the entire frontier valley flashed white for seconds at a time. Far from the nearest settlement, beyond the mining roads and rusted rail lines, a lonely ranch stood against the darkness. Its fences leaned with age. Its barn roof groaned beneath the wind. A lantern swung beneath the porch, casting weak golden light across muddy ground soaked by rain. Inside the cabin, the scarred rancher sat alone beside the fire. He was a massive man once feared across the frontier worlds, a former scout, bounty hunter, and survivor of wars most people only whispered about in saloons. Time had carved hard lines into his face. Old knife scars crossed his chest and shoulders like faded lightning. His dark hair hung slightly long around his neck, damp from rain leaking through the roof earlier that evening. The townspeople called him many things. Ghost Rancher. The Devil of Hollow Ridge. The man death forgot. But none of those names mattered anymore. He lived alone now. And preferred it that way. The fire cracked softly while wind rattled the cabin walls. He cleaned an old revolver with slow, practiced movements before suddenly pausing. A strange sound rolled through the storm. Not thunder. Not wind. His eyes narrowed toward the window. Then the sky exploded. A streak of blue fire tore across the heavens like a falling star, roaring so loudly the entire cabin trembled. Glass shattered inward. Horses screamed from the barn outside. The rancher stood instantly. The burning object screamed over the hills beyond his property before crashing somewhere deep within the western valley. A massive explosion followed seconds later, shaking the earth beneath his boots. Orange fire rose against the storm clouds. For a moment he simply stared. Then he grabbed his rifle. Outside, rain hammered against him like cold needles. He mounted his horse and rode hard into the darkness, the lantern tied beside the saddle swinging wildly while thunder rolled overhead. The valley beyond the ranch had become a nightmare. Burning metal littered the ground across half a mile. Pieces of twisted black wreckage hissed beneath the rain. Strange glowing symbols flickered weakly across broken ship fragments buried in the mud. The rancher dismounted slowly. This was no human craft. He had seen alien vessels once during the border wars decades ago. This was royal. Even destroyed, the ship carried elegance, silver metal curved like flowing water, now ripped open by fire and smoke. Then he heard crying. Small. Terrified. Human instinct moved faster than thought. He raised the rifle and followed the sound through the wreckage until he reached the shattered center of the ship. And froze. An alien woman crouched beside the wreckage, shielding 2 small children behind her. Even injured, she looked regal. Her pale silver-white skin glowed faintly beneath the rain, marked by delicate luminous patterns across her neck and arms. Torn royal fabric clung to her blood-stained body. Long white hair, soaked by rain and ash, hung wildly around her face. One child hid against her chest, trembling violently. The older little girl stood in front of them despite her fear, trying to protect her mother with shaking hands. The moment they saw the human man emerge from the smoke, terror filled their eyes. The queen pulled one jagged metal blade from the wreckage and pointed it weakly toward him. "Stay back," she whispered. Her voice cracked from pain. The rancher said nothing at first. Rain poured between them while burning debris lit the darkness around the valley. Then he noticed something that tightened his jaw instantly. Arrow wounds. Several black feathered arrows were buried in the wreckage around them. Mercenary hunters. Slavers. Which meant whoever attacked them was probably nearby. The older child suddenly spoke in her alien language, clutching her mother's arm desperately while staring at the human with frightened glowing eyes. The queen looked at him with exhausted hatred. To her, humans were monsters. Everyone in the galaxy knew that. The frontier wars had poisoned both species for generations. Entire worlds burned because humans and her people refused to trust one another. And now, after surviving an assassination attempt, the first face she saw in the darkness belonged to a scarred human holding a rifle. The rancher slowly lowered the weapon. "You're hurt," he muttered. The Queen didn't answer. Lightning flashed again. Movement appeared along the ridge above them. The rancher's expression hardened instantly. 5 riders emerged through the storm. Not horses. Hover mounts. Mercenaries wrapped in dark armor descended the hill carrying glowing bows already loaded with poisoned arrows. One of them shouted through the rain. "There they are!" The Queen's face strained of color. The older child grabbed her younger sibling tightly. The rancher exhaled slowly, then cocked his rifle. The first arrow flew. He moved instantly. The rifle thundered through the valley. One mercenary fell backward from his mount before the echo even faded. Another arrow struck the wreckage inches from the Queen's head. "Stay down!" the rancher roared. The attackers charged. Gunfire exploded through the rain. The rancher fought like a man dragged backward into a life he tried to bury years ago. Every movement was fast, brutal, precise. He fired once, another rider dropped. Drew his revolver. 2 more shots cracked through the storm. But the mercenaries kept coming. One leapt from above the wreckage and fired an arrow at the older child. Without thinking, the rancher threw himself between them. The poisoned arrow slammed deep into his shoulder. Pain exploded through his body like fire. The little alien girl screamed. The rancher ripped the arrow free and kept fighting. Another attacker rushed him with an electrified blade. They crashed into the mud together. The rancher drove a knife into the mercenary's throat while rain mixed with blood across his hands. Thunder roared overhead. Then another arrow struck him. This one buried deep into his side. His body staggered violently. The Queen stared in horror. She knew that poison. Nobody survived it. Yet the human still stood. Still fought. Still protected her children like they were his own. The final mercenary raised his bow directly toward the younger child hiding beside the wreckage. The rancher fired first. Silence followed. Only rain remained. The poisoned man stood motionless for several seconds before finally dropping to one knee in the mud. The Queen rushed toward him instinctively. "You fool!" she whispered breathlessly. "Why would you do this?" The rancher looked toward the frightened children beside the burning ship. Then toward the storm above them. "Couldn't let them die," he muttered. Blood mixed with rain beneath him, while the poison slowly spread through his veins beneath the burning sky. 50 years passed. 50 long winters buried beneath dust storms, loneliness, and fading memories. The frontier changed around him, while the scarred rancher remained exactly where the galaxy had left him, alone beneath endless skies at the edge of nowhere. The poison never killed him. But it never stopped killing him either. Every morning began with pain. His hands trembled when the cold settled into his bones. Black veins sometimes darkened beneath the old scars near his shoulder where the poisoned arrows had struck decades earlier. Some nights his chest burned so badly he could barely breathe. Other nights he woke coughing blood into old cloth beside the fire. The doctors in town stopped trying years ago. "You should have died back then," one finally admitted. Maybe he should have. But somehow the man time refused to kill kept waking up. The old ranch still stood against the hills, though age had weathered everything. Fence posts leaned lower now. The barns sagged beneath missing boards. Wind crept through cracks in the cabin walls during winter storms. And still, every evening, the rancher sat on the porch watching the stars. Waiting. Though even he no longer knew for what. The frontier townspeople whispered stories about him like campfire legends. Some claimed alien poison had cursed him with immortality. Others believed he had once slaughtered entire war bands during the border wars. Children dared each other to ride near his ranch at night, hoping to glimpse the ghostly old man beneath the lantern light. But the truth was far simpler. He was just tired. Very tired. Yet despite his age, the rancher remained strangely kind in quiet ways nobody expected from a man with such a reputation. He repaired broken wagons for travelers without charging coin. Fed orphaned children during harsh winters. left sacks of grain outside per cabins without revealing who brought them. And whenever desperate settlers crossed dangerous territory, they somehow slept easier knowing the old rancher still lived nearby. Though he rarely smiled anymore, something honorable remained buried beneath the scars and silence. One snowy afternoon, a little boy in town asked him a question while watching him stare at the sky. "What are you always looking for up there?" The rancher remained quiet for a long moment, then answered softly, "Someone who made a promise." The boy laughed, thinking the old man was joking. But he wasn't. Not a single day had passed when he forgot the frightened alien child hugging him beside the burning wreckage, or the Queen's final words before disappearing into the stars. "I will return." Over time, even he stopped believing it. The galaxy was too large, too cruel. People vanished into it every day. Still, he watched the heavens anyway. Because hope, no matter how foolish, can survive longer than hatred. Far beyond the frontier worlds, however, the galaxy had changed in ways the old rancher could never imagine. Empires rose. Civilizations collapsed. Wars consumed entire star systems. And from the ashes of one broken royal bloodline emerged something terrifying. An empress. Across countless worlds, her name inspired both fear and loyalty. Entire fleets bowed before her banners. Alien warlords surrendered without battle. Pirate kings vanished whenever her armadas entered nearby systems. Some called her the Starborn Empress. Others called her the Mother of Worlds. But only a handful of ancient advisors knew the truth. Once, long ago, she had been a frightened little girl hiding beside a burning ship in the rain, while a wounded human shielded her from poisoned arrows. And she never forgot him. Not once in 50 years. Inside the great halls of her empire, paintings depicted heroes, victories, and conquered worlds. Yet hidden privately within her chambers stood one small object preserved behind glass. An old black-feathered poison arrow. The same kind removed from the human's body that night. The Empress often stared at it silently for hours. "He saved us when nobody else would," she once whispered to her aging mother. "If he still lives, I will find him." The older queen had aged gently over the decades, though sadness often lingered within her silver eyes. "Humans do not live that long," she said softly. But the Empress only looked toward the stars. "He will." And somehow, he did. Back on the frontier world, the old rancher's days became slower. His eyesight faded enough that reading became difficult. Old injuries stiffened his movements. Sometimes he needed several moments simply to stand from his chair beside the fire. Yet each evening, despite pain twisting through his body, he still stepped onto the porch to watch the sunset disappear behind the hills. One evening, while golden light faded across the plains, the horses suddenly became restless. The rancher frowned. Then the sky changed. At first it looked like distant stars moving strangely. Then the heavens filled with light. Massive shapes emerged through the clouds above the frontier valley. Warships. Dozens of them. No. Hundreds. Thunderous engines shook the world itself as enormous alien vessels descended from the atmosphere like floating cities wrapped in silver fire. Townspeople ran screaming into the streets. Church bells rang wildly. Children cried while merchants abandoned wagons and fled indoors. "The aliens are invading! Get underground! Run!" Smaller ships poured from the giant carriers overhead, descending toward the valley in organized formations that blocked out the stars themselves. The old rancher stared upward silently. Deep inside, something old and buried tightened painfully in his chest. Not fear. Recognition. The symbols glowing beneath the ships matched the markings he saw 50 years ago on the burning wreckage. The same royal bloodline. The same people. Slowly, painfully, he stepped onto the porch holding his old rifle. Wind moved through the dry grass around the ranch while thunderous ships hovered above the valley. Then the soldiers arrived. Thousands of armored alien warriors landed outside his property in perfect silence. The frontier town expected slaughter. Expected conquest. Expected death. But instead, the warriors lowered themselves onto one knee. Every single one. The rancher's weathered eyes narrowed slowly. Then the largest ship opened. A long silver bridge descended toward the earth. And through the glowing light walked a tall woman in royal armor surrounded by banners that moved like liquid silver in the wind. Power radiated from her presence. Behind her walked an elderly queen supported gently by attendants. The old rancher's breathing slowed. Because despite 50 years passing, he recognized those eyes instantly. The little alien girl stopped at the edge of the porch. Tears filled her glowing eyes while she stared at the scarred old human who once carried her through fire and rain. Then, with her entire army watching, the Empress whispered softly, "Mother! I told you he would still be waiting." Silence covered the valley. Not the peaceful silence of evening winds or distant prairie birds, but the heavy kind that settles before history changes forever. The frontier town stood frozen beneath the shadow of enormous alien warships hovering across the heavens. Silver light spilled from their engines onto dusty roads, rooftops, fences, and terrified faces staring from windows and church doors. No one moved. No one even breathed loudly. Thousands of alien warriors remained kneeling outside the ranch while banners carrying the royal crest waved softly in the wind. And at the center of it all stood the old rancher, and the alien child he once saved. Except she was no longer a child. She was an empress now. Tall and regal beneath elegant silver-black armor lined with glowing markings, she carried herself with the quiet power of someone capable of commanding galaxies. A flowing cape moved behind her in the evening wind while ceremonial guards remained several steps back, careful not to interrupt the moment unfolding before them. Yet despite the armies, despite the warships, despite the fear she inspired across worlds, her eyes still held the same frightened softness he remembered from the burning wreckage 50 years earlier. The old rancher stared at her silently. Age had weakened him greatly. His shoulders no longer stood as straight as before. White streaks touched his dark hair. Deep exhaustion rested behind his eyes. But the moment he looked at her, the decades seemed to disappear between them. The Empress stepped closer slowly. Then something happened that nobody in the Frontier Valley would ever forget for the rest of their lives. The ruler of countless worlds dropped to her knees before the old human rancher. Gasps spread through the town. Even the wind itself seemed to stop. Behind her, the elderly queen lowered herself carefully as well despite the concern of nearby attendants. Soon after, the thousands of alien warriors bowed their heads together like a moving sea beneath the stars. The Empress looked upward with tears shining in her glowing eyes. "You saved us," she whispered, "when nobody else would." The rancher said nothing at first. His rough fingers tightened slightly around the old rifle resting beside him. Then his voice came quietly. "You survived." A soft smile touched the Empress's face through her tears. "Because of you." The elderly queen stepped forward carefully, emotion trembling through her expression as she studied the man who had once stood bleeding in the rain before a burning ship. "You were supposed to die that night," she said softly. The rancher gave a tired half-smile. "Almost did." For the first time in decades, the queen laughed quietly through tears. The townspeople watched in stunned disbelief. Everything they had ever heard about aliens spoke of cruelty, conquest, and hatred. Yet the most powerful beings in the galaxy now knelt before the lonely old rancher many once called cursed. The Empress slowly rose to her feet. "I searched for you for half my life," she admitted. "Every frontier world. Every old colony. Every war archive." Her voice softened further. "I refused to believe the man who carried me through fire could simply disappear." The rancher looked toward the endless ships above them. "You built all this?" The Empress followed his gaze. "No," she answered gently. "You did." He frowned slightly. She stepped closer onto the porch. "The night you saved us changed everything I believed about humanity. My mother taught me caution. The galaxy taught me fear. But you," her voice trembled, "you taught me mercy." The old queen nodded slowly beside her. "For generations our people believed humans incapable of compassion," she admitted. "Then one human took poison arrows for children he had never met. The rancher looked away awkwardly, uncomfortable beneath such praise. Anyone decent would have done the same. No, the Empress whispered. They wouldn't have. A heavy silence followed. Then distant movement appeared near the town. Human settlers slowly emerged from hiding, farmers, merchants, mothers clutching frightened children. Everyone expected the alien army to claim the world by force. Instead, transport ships began landing across the valley carrying supplies. Food containers, medical equipment, water purification systems, advanced farming technology. The townspeople stared in confusion as alien soldiers carefully unloaded aid instead of weapons. The Empress turned toward the settlement. This world suffered for too long, she declared loudly enough for both species to hear. From this day forward, no child here will starve. No family will freeze during winter. No raider or warlord will threaten these lands again. The crowd remained speechless. Then she added, "Any world protected by him is protected by us." The alien warriors struck their armored fists against their chests in thunderous unison. The sound echoed across the valley like rolling thunder. That night, lights filled the frontier world unlike anything seen before. Alien engineers repaired broken wells. Medics treated the sick freely. Children gathered nervously near hovering ships before curiosity slowly replaced fear. And through it all, the old rancher sat quietly on his porch trying to understand how one decision made half a century ago had somehow reached this moment. Later, beneath the soft glow of lanterns and starlight, alien royal physicians examined the scars beneath his shirt. The elderly queen watched silently nearby. One physician finally looked toward the Empress with concern. "The poison remains inside him," he explained. "It spread too deeply over time." The Empress's expression darkened instantly. "Can he be healed?" The physicians exchanged glances before nodding carefully. "Yes. But treatment must begin soon." The rancher shook his head immediately. "Don't waste your medicine on an old man." The Empress knelt beside his chair. "You carried pain meant for us," she said softly. "Please, allow us to carry yours now." He remained stubbornly silent. Then the elderly queen stepped forward. Under the lantern light, age finally showed clearly upon her once regal features. Yet kindness still radiated from her silver eyes. "You gave my daughter a future," she whispered. "You gave our people peace." Her voice broke gently. "Must I spend the rest of my life knowing the man who saved my children chose to die alone?" The rancher looked at her for a very long moment. 50 years ago she had looked at him with fear. Now she looked at him with something far deeper. Gratitude. Trust. Perhaps even love born slowly across decades of memory and longing. The old rancher finally sighed heavily. "All right," he muttered. "Fine." Relief flooded the Empress's face so suddenly she laughed softly through tears. The elderly queen smiled down at him beneath the stars. For the first time in 50 years, the poison inside him no longer felt heavier than hope. Weeks later, the frontier valley transformed completely. Alien and human children played together through golden fields where fear once ruled. Advanced machines repaired homes and roads. Markets reopened stronger than before. And every evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills and soft rivers of gold, the old rancher sat quietly on his porch beside the alien queen while enormous peaceful ships drifted silently above the clouds. One evening, the Empress approached them holding 2 cups of warm frontier tea she had learned to make from old human records. She handed one carefully to the rancher, then sat nearby watching the sunset. For a while, nobody spoke. They simply listened to the wind moving through the grass. Finally, the rancher looked toward the stars one last time. Not with loneliness anymore, but with peace. Because the promise made beneath the burning sky had finally come home.